Come on, while you're still single, okay?
But we're already legally married, you know?
David said, clearly troubled by Grace's tempting voice.
But until the reception starts, you can still pretend to be single, right? Once everyone recognizes that you belong to Jessica, our relationship would technically be illegal.
So, you're planning to break up with me once I'm married?
Of course not.
Grace's sly laughter echoed softly across the floor.
It'll just be the start of a new kind of relationship, won't it?
Yeah, I guess both you and I still need Jessica for now.
Exactly. We need the CO to keep working hard and earning money.
Almost as if waiting for those words, the two of them reached for each other, tangled in an embrace. It is with great regret that we must announce our divorce at this reception.
Hey, you are carrying your joke a bit too far.
When I turned on my phone, there it was. My name is Jessica Rose. I'm 29 years old. I am the CEO of a startup company. I ventured into a niche industry, and it's been fairly successful. The job mainly involves matching one type of professional with another. Not just a one-way service where workers take on client jobs, but where they find partners to complement their shortcomings. That's a simple way to describe what we do. I used to be in sales, but after meeting so many different professionals, I had an epiphany. If these two people worked together, things would go much smoother. It's something I noticed over and over again. Being a small company, unlike the big firms, we can be more hands-on. Word of mouth started spreading, and thankfully, we've been consistently busy with work. It was 4 years ago, when I was 26, that I decided to leave the trading company I worked for and start my own business. At that time, I was dating David, who later became my husband. David was a bartender at a favorite shop bar of mine.
Jessica, you really seem like a business person.
He once said, even though I was still an employee thinking about starting my own company. After work, I'd stop by for a drink to wash away my stress of the day before heading home. That bar became my sanctuary, and David was always there. At the time, my job kept me so busy that I barely had any time for anything else. I stumbled upon that small bar one day, liked the vibe, and it became part of my regular route home.
Here's your cocktail for today, Jessica.
At first, I drank the standard cocktails, but one day, out of the blue, he made me an original cocktail. It was sweet, with a slight bitterness, reflecting exactly how exhausted I felt back then. That moment brought us closer, and it didn't take long for us to become a couple. David was also a big part of why I decided to start my own business.
I'm just a hired bartender now, but I plan to open my own place someday.
David's dream of having his own bar eventually became my dream too. So, I quit my job after 4 years and launched my business.
I want to support you, Jessica.
David said when he proposed, and I accepted. We decided to wait before having our wedding ceremony. We got legally married first and started living together.
I've decided to go independent, just like you, Jessica.
As soon as we moved in together, David said,
But I need a little help getting started. Could you lend me some money, please?
It was obviously about money. The company I worked for was a large corporation with high salaries and bonuses, and I had a lot of allowances due to my good sales performance. I also had substantial savings since I started investing while I was still a student. To start my business, I only needed a computer and some office equipment. I decided to set up my office at home, so there was no need for additional rent. It could be started with just a minimal cost. Starting a bar, however, was a different story. It required much more money. I loved David, and he was the one who pushed me to follow my dreams. After some thought, I decided to provide the funds. David was thrilled, but while I was happy to help him, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He said he wanted to support my business. That's what he said when we got married, but as soon as we did, David started depending on me instead, and I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. But that was only a small part of it. The feeling of being able to fulfill the wishes of someone I love was indeed overwhelming. I think the joy outweighed everything else, though I still carry a slight pain in my heart. Aside from David, there was one other person I told about my plan to start my business. My best friend, Grace. Grace and I started at the company together. I graduated from a 4-year university and joined the sales department, while Grace, who graduated from a 2-year community college, was placed in reception. We first met during the initial training program, which was the same for everyone, regardless of department. We happened to sit next to each other, and since we were both women, it was easy to start chatting. Grace was a strikingly beautiful woman with a certain magnetic charm that drew people to her. We naturally hit it off, and before I knew it, we were sharing everything with each other. It's strange how two people so different could become such close friends, but I guess that's just how human relationships work sometimes.
I came to this company to find my husband. It's a big company, so there should be plenty of elites, right?
Grace used to say this jokingly, but deep down, she was serious.
I don't want to be working hard even after getting married. I'm definitely going to marry someone who can let me live a luxurious life as a stay-at-home wife.
She always said that. So when I told her I was going to start my own business, she was genuinely surprised and worried.
Are you serious? Aren't you scared?
Well, it's not like I'm not scared.
Right. You're leaving a stable job to walk down an uncertain path.
We both worked for a trading company that was considered pretty large. The work was tough, but the allowances and benefits were solid. Even if you got married and had kids, the company offered maternity and parental leave, making it easier for women to continue working.
It feels like a waste to quit before getting those benefits. If it were me, I would never leave.
Grace's eyes seemed to hold a hint of pity as she looked at me. I regretted telling her about my plans. I should have known that Grace and I were different. From her perspective, a woman like me who would choose a path that involved hardship must have seemed unbelievable. No matter how close you are, there are things you can't understand about each other. I had been drinking a little at the time, and in a moment of drunken boldness, I said too much. Looking back, I realized I should have chosen my confidence more carefully. Later, when I had actually left my jobs and my business started taking off, Grace seemed to have completely forgotten what she had said and came to me with this.
Can I help out at your company, Jessica?
Apparently, the guy she had her eye on at work got engaged to another woman.
There's no hope for me staying at this company. And honestly, I'd rather do meaningful work with you, Jessica, than be just another cog in a big machine.
My best friend Grace had already quit her jobs with that intention, and I reluctantly agreed to take her in. I was just reaching the point where I couldn't handle everything on my own and needed to bring on more help. So I figured it wouldn't be so bad to work with someone I already knew well. I did think she was being a bit opportunistic, but I understood it as Grace making a realistic decision. 2 years have passed since Grace joined my company, and now we have 10 employees. The workload keeps increasing. To be honest, Grace isn't exactly a powerhouse when it comes to work, but her people skills make her a valuable buffer in the office, and for that, I'm grateful. She often relays things to me that others might find hard to say directly, acting almost like a white figure in the company, which has been helpful in many situations. Meanwhile, although my company is growing steadily, David's bar hasn't taken off as well.
I'm sorry, but could you hold on a bit longer?
More often than not, I find myself covering the rent and expenses for his bar. Maybe you should consider changing your business strategy. I suggested, though I wasn't sure if it was my place to say, and that seemed to irritate David.
Yeah, you're right. You're the one with the business acumen, unlike me. Sorry for being such a useless husband.
With that, David slammed the door and headed to his bar. Lately, we've been having more and more of these little arguments. Do you think this might be the end of us? I couldn't help but voice my worry to Grace.
Are you thinking about getting a divorce?
Grace asked me bluntly. I don't want to split up, but I don't know how David feels. And maybe, almost as if confessing, I finally voiced a suspicion I had been keeping inside.
Maybe what?
Maybe David has another woman. I had started noticing things a while ago. Our work schedules don't align, so David and I have different routines. I work from early morning to late afternoon, but my schedule can vary since I do both remote work and go out for meetings. David works evenings to late at night at the bar. We try to find time to spend together as a couple, but the mismatch in our schedules makes it difficult.
Is it not going well?
I answered just as honestly. I don't know. We usually talked when we saw each other, but that was about it.
How many years have you been married?
3 years.
Maybe it's just that phase. I feel like I've heard about this before.
It's true that the excitement from when we were newlyweds is already gone.
They say that once you become family, it's different from being lovers.
I couldn't help but feel a bit sad as I found myself agreeing with everything Grace was saying.
So, Jessica, what do you want to do? Are you thinking about divorce?
Hearing that word made my chest tighten. I don't think that's what I want.
Then maybe you need to inject some life into your marriage.
What? Grace suggested that we do something to revive our stagnant relationship.
Why not have a wedding?
Although we had registered our marriage, we never had a wedding because we wanted to wait until life settled down. Could something like that really bring back a fading relationship? And how would I even bring it up to David?
Don't worry, I'll talk to him. You just leave it to me, Jessica.
I decided to go along with Grace's suggestion.
I'm sorry. I've kept you waiting and relied on you for too long, Jessica.
David said this while holding me tightly.
Grace scolded me. She said she wouldn't forgive me if I made her best friend cry.
It seemed that Grace had managed to talk to David about it.
How about we have a wedding?
And so, in our 3rd year of marriage, we ended up having a wedding and reception. It was unexpected, but as I prepared for the ceremony, I realized I was getting excited. What was this feeling? Was it the excitement of a bride? The feeling of stepping forward as a married couple with the one I love? Even though we had been legally married for 3 years, it felt strangely new. Maybe ceremonies and events have the power to uplift people's spirits. And then my wedding day came. The venue was a famous hotel with a chapel. After the wedding, we planned to hold a reception in one of the rooms there. We invited our families, friends, and colleagues, making it a proper wedding. We exchanged vows in the chapel, pledging eternal love, and the wedding went off without a hitch. After the ceremony, we took some commemorative photos and had a short break before the reception. I pressed my flushed cheeks, still buzzing with the excitement of being a bride, as I returned to the waiting room. Just as I was about to turn the doorknob, I realized something was off. This wasn't the bride's room. It was the groom's, David's room. Maybe I got the rooms mixed up in all the excitement. As I reached for the door, I suddenly felt a strong urge to check on David. Maybe he was feeling just as nervous and excited as I was. Without thinking, I gently and quietly opened the door a crack, intending to call out to him, but I stopped in my tracks. I heard a woman's voice coming from inside. Not just any voice, but a voice I knew very well. Normally, it wouldn't be strange to hear these two talking, but today was our wedding day, and it was the voice of one who should not be in the groom's waiting room. A wave of dread washed over me. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone from the pocket of my dress and switched to recording mode. If I slipped it through the crack in the door, I might be able to capture what was happening inside. Even if I couldn't get a clear video, at least I could record the audio. I pressed my ear against the door to listen.
You were amazing, darling.
Did you fall in love with me again?
Of course.
It sounds like an appropriate conversation for two people in this room, if this is the groom and the bride. But here I was, the bride, standing outside, listening to them. The conversation continued, full of sweet, flirtatious banter. Why on earth were these two talking like this? Maybe because the excitement of my wedding day had suddenly vanished. I found myself disturbingly calm in this situation. Normally, I'd expect to be furious and storm into the room, but instead, I was collecting evidence like a spy, keeping my presence hidden.
Hey, let's do it.
Grace's voice dripped with a clingy tone, and as she seemed to ask David for something.
Come on, Grace. This is really risky.
David said, trying to sound like he was holding her back, but there was a hint in his voice that he wanted the same thing.
It's okay, right? You're still technically single, aren't you?
But we're already married.
David replied, sounding a bit troubled by Grace's advances.
But until the reception starts, you can still act single, right? Once everyone recognizes you as Jessica's, our relationship would be illegal.
So, are you planning to break up with me once I'm married?
Of course not.
Grace's sly laughter slithered across the floor.
It'll just be the start of a new kind of relationship, right?
Yeah, I guess both you and I still need Jessica for now.
Exactly, the boss needs to keep bringing in the money.
As if they were waiting for those words, the two of them fell into each other's arms. Soon I heard the sound of heavy breathing, rustling fabric, and furniture creaking. I couldn't bring myself to witness it with my own eyes, but I knew my phone had recorded everything. Once the noises subsided and I couldn't hear their voices anymore, I slowly pulled my phone back from the door, turned off the recording, and quietly stepped away. I entered my own waiting room next door as if nothing had happened. It was only then that I realized my hands were trembling. I was scared to watch it, but I knew I had to. I checked the video I had just saved. It's clearer than I expected, I muttered, my voice sounding like it was echoing from the depths of hell. What should I do with this? A groom, on his wedding day, having an affair with the bride's best friend in the waiting room. It sounds like the title of a cheap porn video. Somehow, it all made sense now. The suspicion I had about David seeing someone else, it all fell into place. As soon as Grace heard about it, she and David moved quickly. They probably couldn't afford for me to divorce him. David needed me to keep funding his bar, and Grace was likely getting some sort of allowance from him. I was nothing more than a convenient cash cow for them. They wanted to secretly keep their relationship going while extracting as much as they could from me. That's what today's charade was all about. They probably thought that by dangling the dream of a wedding, they could keep deceiving me for a little longer. How foolish they must think I am. But I have to admit, I was naive. I trusted them and ignored the signs. But now, looking back, so many things were off. For instance, whenever I had a business issue on my mind, David would suddenly offer some advice. Grace must have been leaking information about my work to David, trying to steer things in their favor. Maybe Grace joined my company with that intention from the start. When I let myself think that way, the doubts keep coming. Right now, I have no one to talk to, and I'm sitting here alone, figuring out my next move. A sad bride on her wedding day, thinking about such things. It's so pathetic, it almost makes me laugh. But I'm not the type to just sit and cry. I'll make sure to pay them back many times over. I started planning in my mind. Then I walked out of the room, keeping my composure, and headed to the reception hall where my family was waiting. With a bright smile, I played the part of the happy bride perfectly. Holding the hand of the groom who had just betrayed me, we entered the hall together. To thunderous applause, we were escorted to the head table. As we sat down, the music stopped, and the host handed the microphone to David. We had decided he would give the opening speech. But before he could take it, I quickly snatched the mic from the side. David looked at me surprised, but I smiled at him and nodded reassuringly.
What kind of surprise is this? Are you announcing that our married life is going to be full of surprises like this?
David's voice echoed through the mic, and the crowd burst into laughter. He didn't seem to suspect anything, seeing how happy and playful I looked. Originally, my husband David was supposed to give the opening speech, but before that, I have an announcement I'd like to make. A murmur spread through the room. What could the bride possibly want to announce herself? Some people even whispered that it might be a pregnancy announcement. Unfortunately, it wasn't anything so joyous. In fact, I doubt anyone could have imagined what I was about to say at a wedding reception. Thank you all so much for gathering here today to celebrate with us. First, I want to express our deepest gratitude. When I thanked everyone, David stood up in a panic and thanked all in the same way. There was a little laughter from the guests at our appearance. It looked like a charming scene of a husband already being henpecked by his wife. What I'm about to announce is something that even David doesn't know about. This is the first time anyone is hearing this. I smiled sweetly at David as I spoke, and he smiled back, clearly expecting some sort of pleasant surprise. Well then, here it is. David and I have decided to get a divorce. The room, which had been filled with joyful chatter, fell deathly silent, followed by a murmur of confusion and disbelief.
Hey, what are you talking about, Jessica?
David stammered, a nervous laugh escaping him, but he didn't seem to believe it yet. How could he? It is with great regret that we must announce our divorce here at this reception.
Hey, you are carrying your joke a bit too far.
David scolded harshly, but I only smiled more brightly.
Why are you smiling? Why would you say something like that? Take it back. Apologize to everyone right now.
No, we're getting divorced.
I'm not divorcing you. There's no reason to.
David shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Oh, there's a reason, I said, pulling my phone out of the pocket of my wedding dress. Did you know that some wedding dresses now have pockets? Even brides want to carry their phones these days. I turned on my phone, and the following conversation started playing, echoing throughout the hall from the mic I was holding.
You were amazing, darling.
Did you fall in love with me again?
Of course.
Some people might have thought it was a conversation between me and David. But David and one other person in the room knew immediately that it wasn't.
Stop it.
David lunged at me, but I had anticipated that much. I quickly turned and ran, clutching the phone and microphone.
I said stop it.
Even if some people initially thought it was just a conversation between David and me, his frantic behavior would have made it clear that something was off. I skipped ahead in the video and played the key part.
But until the reception starts, you're still technically single, right? Once everyone recognizes that you belong to Jessica, our relationship would become illegal.
So, are you planning to break up with me once I'm married?
Of course not.
By now, everyone in the room understood. This was a conversation between the groom and someone other than the bride. And they likely realized it took place just before the reception began.
It'll just be the start of a new kind of relationship, right?
Yeah, I guess both you and I still need Jessica for now.
Exactly. The boss needs to keep bringing in the money.
Just as the sounds of something beginning could be heard, I turned off the recording. From here on, it's not the kind of content that's appropriate for everyone to hear. And just so you know, this phone doesn't only have audio, it has video as well. The room erupted in a chaotic murmur as people realized what was happening. I looked over to the table where my employees were seated. There, Grace sat silent in her red dress. While the others were buzzing with confusion, Grace remained frozen. Somehow she looked like she was trembling. As I stared at Grace, David seized the moment, snatching the phone from my hand and smashing it to the ground, stomping on it.
There, now there's no evidence. Serves you right.
David shouted, his voice tinged with madness as he stood there panting.
Now there's no reason for our divorce. I'm not leaving you.
His eyes were bloodshot. Too bad for you. Even if you've destroyed my phone, the data is backed up in the cloud. I can make as many copies as I need. At my words, David collapsed in defeat. It wasn't long before everyone knew who David's affair partner was. The employees recognized Grace's voice and demeanor. My family, who knew Grace well, were initially in disbelief when I told them, but their disbelief quickly turned to anger. David's parents, on the other hand, were so devastated that they practically begged for forgiveness at the reception. It was hard to watch, and I felt a twinge of guilt, but there was nothing I could do. Naturally, the reception was called off. I apologized to the guests many times, but no one blamed me. The groom engaged in an affair with his mistress right before the wedding reception. Everyone's judgment turned against David. David sat on the floor like an emotionless doll. He couldn't even react to the cold stare. Grace had disappeared from the venue at some point. But no matter where she went, I would make sure to track her down. I whispered that to myself in my heart. Our divorce proceedings went smoothly. In his state, David had no grounds to argue. He had little to his name anyway. Despite calling it his bar, it was really just a name. At the time, no one would lease a place to him, so I had signed the rental agreement in my name, with David merely acting as the manager. His parents, who hadn't known this, were shocked. David had made it seem as though he had started the business on his own, but that was far from the truth. As a result, there was no money for alimony or asset division. David's parents, realizing everything, emptied their retirement savings and even took out loans to cover the costs. Including the money I had spent on the bar, it amounted to a significant sum, but they insisted on paying it all. Though I told them it wasn't necessary, they were adamant, and I reluctantly accepted.
Are you going to take my bar away too?
David protested, but his parents yelled at him, silencing him. They said they would have him work off the debt by living and working on a relative's farm. David, who had always liked the urban, sophisticated lifestyle, would now be working in the country, something he had always despised. To me, it seemed like the most fitting punishment. Maybe this would help him appreciate the dignity and importance of such work, but whether he changed or not no longer mattered to me. As for Grace, she disappeared for a while. But I contacted her parents, and when she returned to her family home, they ensured she was brought to the table to face the consequences. After fleeing the reception, Grace apparently sought refuge with a few men she knew, but they eventually grew tired of her and kicked her out. After bouncing from one place to another, she eventually had nowhere else to go and had to return to her parents' home.
It's not my fault. David was the one who fell for me and made the first move.
No matter how you try to spin it, the fact remains that you had an affair with my ex-husband while we were still married. I will be taking legal action for damages.
I don't have a penny to my name.
Grace's parents were furious at her brazen attitude, but nothing they said got through to her. Like David's parents at the reception, Grace's parents repeatedly apologized and offered to pay the compensation, damages, and even the reception cost. I felt sorry for them, just as I had for David's parents, but since Grace couldn't pay herself, I decided to accept their offer. However, I declined the reimbursement for the reception costs, as David's parents had already covered that. Grace seemed truly bitter about the situation and, in an attempt to spite me, ended up revealing everything. While I knew she might have exaggerated some things to make herself look better, I believe the core of her story was true. According to Grace, she had been deeply resentful ever since I got married and became independent.
I am prettier, more urban, and more loved by men than you. But you, who I thought were plain and boring, married someone as handsome as David and became the CEO. I couldn't stand it.
Grace tried to find a suitable man who could outshine me, approaching several promising male colleagues, but none of them saw her as more than a fling. Grace had a reputation as a notorious flirt since the time I was still at the company, so it's no wonder no one saw her as marriage material. I had warned her many times. If she was serious about finding a husband, she needed to be more cautious in her behavior. But Grace never listened to me.
You just don't get it, Jessica. You can't understand what it's like to be a woman like me, who's always being pursued by men.
She would sigh and brush off my advice, so I eventually gave up on talking to her about her relationships.
I've always looked down on you, thinking you were just throwing yourself into work because you weren't attractive enough to get a man. So when I heard you were becoming the CEO, I was determined to find a way to ruin it for you.
All the while, I had no idea, continuing our friendship, only to have her eventually go after my husband. When Grace realized no one at work would take her seriously, she set her sights on David. She wormed her way into my company, pretended to be supportive, and seduced David, hoping they could take over the business together. In truth, I had known David had been unfaithful from time to time. He was always that kind of person, and I figured that if it was just a little thing fueled by alcohol, it was something I could overlook. As long as it was a brief fling and I didn't find out about it, I thought I could turn a blind eye. As long as he came back to me, I thought that would be enough. But when I talked to Grace about it, I felt uneasy, like something was different this time. Back then, I still had feelings for David and was serious about not wanting to break up. So I turned to Grace, who I thought knew a lot about relationships, and that's how things ended up the way they did.
I heard him say that your company only exists because of him. He said there's no way a woman could run a business on her own. And believing that is what got me into this mess.
Grace had flattered David, encouraging him to exaggerate his role in my success. And David, driven by pride, started believing his own lies. Grace, in turn, fed information about my company back to David. David pretended to be worried about me, gave me some advice, and then felt like he was really running my company. But while I listened to David's advice, I never let it sway my decisions. I knew the fate of my company and employees rested on my shoulders. If David's advice made sense, I'd acknowledge it. But if it didn't, I'd thank him and move on. It was all just a fantasy they had built together. Just look at how David's bar turned out. He clearly lacked any real business acumen. That's the reality. After I took everything I was owed from David and Grace, I decided to cut all ties with them. I have a company to run and employees who depend on me. I don't have time to dwell on such things. I've already caused everyone enough worry with this situation. Of course, word about the two of them still reaches me from time to time. As for David, I've heard he's settled into working quietly on the farm. Whether he's lost the will to resist or perhaps found that he actually suits the work, I don't know. And I don't care. All I know is what his parents have reported to me. Perhaps they told me in the hope that I'd reconcile with a reformed David, but I only responded with, "Good to hear," and left it at that. Grace, on the other hand, was brought back home by her parents and was quiet for a while, but eventually ran away and is now missing. A friend once mentioned seeing someone who looked like her in the nightlife scene, but it could have been someone else. Whatever the case, what she's doing now is none of my concern. There was a time when it was really hard. Having something like that happen at the reception full of people, it was humiliating. Of course, as the victim, I was also subjected to prying eyes. Some men even approached me, thinking of me as the poor woman betrayed by her husband and best friend. But I brushed them all off and threw myself into my work. Now, I've regained my composure. My company is thriving. After going through such a tough time, I'm surrounded by people I can truly trust. When you're vulnerable, all sorts of opportunists come out of the woodwork. But thanks to them, I've managed to clear them out and rebuild a solid foundation. I'm not ready to love anyone again just yet, but maybe someday I'll find someone special. For now, the most important thing is to keep my emotions clear of love and friendship that might cloud my judgment. It was a tough lesson, but I've learned it well. I know that truly becoming happy is the best revenge against those two. I'll keep moving forward with my eyes set on that day. After all, it's when we overcome failures that we truly reveal our worth.